Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Strong summer crowd. This is really nice. So this week's double parsha is Mattot-Mas'ei, and it brings us to the end of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, that recounted all of the wandering in the desert for nearly 40 years. And now as the Israelites are preparing to finally, after this whole journey, enter into the Promised Land, there's a shift in tone in parts of this week's Parsha. The shift has slowly been happening over the past few weeks, and now it really changes. With their backs turning to the wilderness, the Israelites begin to look forward to what life will be like in this next great phase of their story. And the Torah begins to trade instructions for how to live in the desert for the details of land distribution and inheritance and other laws that will regulate actual life inside the land. We move, in the words of my teacher, Dr. Arnie Eisen, from the unbounded and undifferentiated empty space to a filled-in grid of townships and property lines. The Torah really seems to be underscoring this transition that's about to take place from wilderness to settlement, from the disorder and chaos of slavery and exile to the possibility of order and justice. As part of this blueprint of nation building, Moshe receives instructions about setting up arei miklat, cities of refuge. God tells him to explain to the Israelites that they are to designate 6 special cities where someone who has accidentally killed another person unintentionally may flee. 3 in the land of Canaan itself, and 3 on the other side of the Jordan where the Israelites were camped before crossing over. The idea was that a person responsible for accidental manslaughter could remain in any of these cities and be protected from vigilante justice while awaiting a fair trial. The cities of refuge seem to have been an answer to the problem that in early societies, especially non-urban ones or wherever you might find breakdown of law and order, there was always the danger that people would take the law into their own hands, especially when a member of their family was killed, and then begin this cycle of vengeance and retaliation that had no natural end, one revenge killing leading to another. And so these 6 cities were designated as a tikkun for that problem, a fix for that problem. They were to be crucial institutions of a just society without which the burgeoning Israelite nation could never survive. The tragic irony, of course, is that we learned a couple weeks ago that Moshe himself will die in the wilderness. And so he finds himself in this painful position of describing a future that he now knows he will never be a part of. He teaches the Israelites how they are going to organize their society and divide their land and build these crucial institutions, all while knowing that he won't be living it and building it alongside them. And yet, while Moshe was not able to participate in building the institutions in the land itself, he could still fulfill part of this particular mitzvah. He could participate in building those 3 arei miklat, the cities of refuge, that were designated for the east side of the Jordan. And we learn later on in chapter 4 of Devarim that Moshe did indeed take the time in this last chapter of his life to set aside the 3 cities to the east side of the Jordan before he died. In a certain light, reading that scene where Moshe establishes those first 3 cities of refuge feels a little heartbreaking, like a desperate last grasp to touch a future from which he has already been excluded. But the ancient rabbis, who are always eager to portray Moshe in the best possible light, understood that act differently. For them, the designation of those 3 cities was not a consolation prize, but an expression of Moshe's eagerness to participate as much as he could in building the institutions that the Israelites would need to thrive. He may not have been able to complete the commandment in its fullest sense, but he refused to let that become an excuse for inaction. In the midrashic telling of this story, Moshe was going to do as many mitzvot as possible while he was still on this earth. In fact, the Midrash in Devarim Rabbah imagines that when God told him that he would not enter the land, his first response was, "If I am passing out of this world, how could I not first set aside cities of refuge?" At least in the rabbinic imagination of who Moshe was, if there was even part of the work of building a just and sustainable society that lay within his reach, he would embrace it wholeheartedly. Better to build half a sanctuary of justice than none at all. The rabbis liken Moshe's eagerness to that of King David, who also was told by God that he would not see the completion of his own magnum opus, the creation of the temple in Jerusalem. David could easily have stepped away in disappointment from that project, leaving the task to his successor, and instead he spent his remaining years gathering materials and drawing up plans and preparing the foundation for a vision whose fulfillment he knew belonged to another generation. In her commentary on this parsha, Rabbi Aviva Richman explains that Moshe's insistence on establishing these 3 cities of refuge in particular before he died maybe signaled something actually even deeper than this general eagerness to fulfill divine requests. She writes that maybe Moshe was uniquely interested in setting up these cities because at one time in his life, he had needed one himself, when he ran from Pharaoh after he killed the Egyptian who he saw striking the Israelite. He knew what it felt like to be on the run. After killing the Egyptian, of course, Moshe fled into the desert, eventually landing in Midian, where he was taken in by strangers who would one day become his family when he married his wife Tzipporah, who came from that community. And it's in Midian, that city of refuge, that he started the next chapter of his own life and the life of the Jewish people. Now, at the end of his life, as he was confronting his own mortality, he remembered that core kindness from his past and resolved to pass it on as one of his last acts. Rabbi Richman was suggesting that by choosing to build these cities, Moshe did the work that spoke most directly to his heart, in the limited time allotted to him, with all the zeal and gusto that he could muster. For him, accomplishing half of this mitzvah was no consolation. It was of a piece of his own history, a passing on of the very same protection and safety that he experienced while hiding in Midian all those years ago. As we look back on Pride Month that has just ended, I was connecting to elements of Rabbi Richman's interpretation very personally. I, along with many of us in this room who belong to the LGBTQ community, am living inside the refuge that other people built for me over so many generations, with no guarantee that they would ever get to rest inside of it themselves. People who did not live to see the world become as safe as it is today. Of course, we still have so very far to go. Spent their lives building whatever shelter they could for people they might never meet. No matter your own identity, every one of us is living inside institutions and communities and freedoms that previous generations began building long before we arrived. The question before us is whether we will simply inherit those gifts or whether we will add something of our own for those who come next before our own chapter closes. What refuge will exist in the future because we were here? Who will breathe a little easier in 2066, in 40 years, or 2086, because we answered the particular call that was uniquely ours to answer? Rowley often quotes the scene in the book of Devarim when Moshe asks the Israelite people, Ve'ata Yisrael, ma Adonai Elohecha shoel me'imach. This is a pasuk that I think a lot of us have become familiar with. And now, O Israel, and it's said in the singular, what is Adonai, your God, asking of you? And then there's the famous comment from the Netivot Shalom, the Hasidic commentator, who adds, Me'imach daika, of you in particular. What is God asking of you specifically? What's your service in the world? What's the unique contribution that you can make? I have loved this question ever since I first heard Rowley ask it, but it's a huge question, and it's not a simple one to answer. And I think Moshe is showing us one way of answering this question, which can often feel so overwhelming to ponder, that our best service might just be adding to whatever work was done in previous generations to make our own life, our own dreams, our own freedoms possible in the first place, so that those who come after us can live in even more security and justice and possibility. To delve into our own experiences and life stories in order to gain greater clarity on what our unique perspective allows us to see and therefore contribute. Most of us, if we're honest, will have to make peace with the fact that we will not live to see the fulfillment of everything that we hope to build. Not the full repair of the world, not the completion of the projects that matter the most to us. And yet, in the face of that stark fact, Moshe's actions open up a path for us to walk, tying our histories to our futures and thus extending the arc of justice. The opening scene in Devarim, when Moshe finally does designate those 3 cities, begins with the words Az Yavdil, and he designated, which echoes the phrase, of course, Az Yashir, and he sang, the famous opening to Moshe's song at the parting of the Red Sea. It's a really incredible linguistic echo, Az Yavdil, Az Yashir. At the sea, Moshe sang because he and his people had been delivered from danger. And here, decades later, at the end of his life, the rabbis suggest in the Midrash that the construction of Az Yavdil implies that Moshe was once again singing when he built those cities. This time, because he had the chance to create freedom and sanctuary for others, and he knew personally how redemptive that could be. One day, if we're fortunate, someone we will never know may find shelter in something that we chose to build. May we, like Moshe, have the courage to devote ourselves to work whose fullest fruits we may never live to see, and may we merit to become people who sing not only when we ourselves are delivered, but whenever we harness an opportunity to build a world of deliverance for those who will come next. Shabbat Shalom.